Men stopped spending, so women started begging. In a world where the economy is crumbling under endless inflation, skyrocketing housing costs, and jobs that barely cover the basics, a shocking reality has taken hold. Single men are quietly thriving in peace and financial stability, while countless women across the West face mounting poverty, desperation, and the harsh truth that independence was sold as empowerment but delivered isolation and hardship. Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear reveals not just why this shift happened, but how it exposes the deepest consequences of decades of societal choices that once seemed unstoppable. Men stopped spending, so women started begging. Across the United States, Europe, and even parts of Asia like China, a profound change has unfolded as men have chosen to walk away from traditional dating, relationships, and marriage. This is not anger or revenge, but a calm, deliberate decision to prioritize their own lives, health, finances, and mental clarity over systems that no longer serve them. While men focus on building strength through consistent workouts, saving aggressively, investing wisely, pursuing hobbies that bring genuine fulfillment, traveling to places where genuine connections are still possible, and enjoying simple luxuries like full nights of sleep and home cooked meals, women increasingly find themselves struggling to maintain even basic stability. The cost of living has exploded with rents doubling in many cities, groceries becoming a weekly burden, utilities rising without mercy, and entry level jobs paying wages that lag far behind what is needed to live independently. Women who once declared they needed no man now post publicly about needing help with rent, food, or even basic transportation, admitting in moments of raw honesty that the promise of total self reliance has left them vulnerable and alone. These are the same voices that for generations promoted the idea that masculinity itself was problematic, that approaching a woman was inherently threatening, that men should be shamed for natural instincts, and that feminism would deliver freedom without trade offs. Yet, when economic pressures intensified, the response from many women shifted to pleas for men to return as providers, to step up as protectors, to rescue them from circumstances that independence failed to prevent. Men, however, have not rushed back. They have instead found solace in solitude, discovering that life without constant relational demands allows for remarkable personal growth and contentment. Consider the broader economic landscape that has accelerated this divide. Inflation has eroded purchasing power at rates not seen in decades, turning what used to be affordable necessities into luxuries for many. Housing markets in major cities have priced out entire generations, with average home prices far outpacing wage growth and requiring dual high incomes just to qualify for mortgages that once seemed attainable on a single salary. Student debt burdens weigh heavily, particularly on those who pursued degrees in fields that promised opportunity but delivered underemployment or gig work that offers no security or benefits. Corporate jobs that once provided stability now demand longer hours for stagnant pay, with layoffs looming as companies prioritize profits over people. In this environment, single men have adapted by minimizing expenses, living frugally, building emergency funds, and investing in assets that grow over time rather than depreciating ones like excessive dating or luxury consumption aimed at impressing others. They eat nutrient dense foods to maintain health, exercise regularly to build resilience, sleep adequately to sharpen focus, and pursue passions that enrich their days without requiring external validation. This lifestyle yields compounding benefits, from better physical and mental health to financial freedom that allows travel, skill development, and even occasional indulgences without debt. Women, meanwhile, often face compounded challenges when single. Many carry the dual load of career demands and caregiving for aging parents, with fewer resources to allocate towards self care or savings. The absence of a supportive partner amplifies financial strain, leading to situations where basic needs go unmet and desperation sets in. Public posts and videos show women openly discussing how feminism's emphasis on independence overlooked the practical realities of economic interdependence, how corporate ladders left them exhausted with little to show for years of effort, and how the narrative that men were optional ignored the protective and provisioning roles that historically balanced societal structures. This shift did not happen overnight. For 50 years, cultural messages consistently portrayed traditional male roles as oppressive, masculinity as toxic, and any expression of male initiative as suspect. Men were told to suppress natural behaviors, to apologize for existing in spaces, to accept being sidelined in favor of empowerment narratives that celebrated female autonomy above all else. Many men absorbed these lessons not with outrage, but with quiet withdrawal. They left bars, clubs, coffee shops, gyms, and public events where interactions once occurred naturally, choosing instead private pursuits that offered peace without judgment. Video games became a source of strategic engagement and community without drama. Hobbies like reading, building, or exploring provided fulfillment without expectations. And overseas travel to regions where traditional gender dynamics still prevail offered affordable companionship and respect that felt absent at home. In places like the Philippines or other parts of Southeast Asia, men report spending modest amounts equivalent to a domestic date night for entire weekends of genuine connection, good food, and intimacy, then returning to their independent lives refreshed and unburdened. This pattern has grown as economic realities make domestic dating increasingly costly and emotionally taxing. Women who once dismissed average men as unworthy now express regret in public forums, acknowledging that the pool of willing partners has shrunk dramatically because men have recalibrated their priorities towards self preservation and genuine value exchange rather than one sided provision. The consequences extend beyond individual lives into societal structures. Declining marriage and birth rates reflect this detachment, with fewer families forming and populations aging rapidly in many Western nations. When men opt out of traditional provider roles, the economic model that relied on dual income households or male led financial support strains under its own weight. Women face higher risks of poverty in later years, especially without shared assets or support networks built through long term partnerships. Stories emerge of women caring for elderly parents while struggling to afford their own housing, medical care, or even groceries, leading to pleas for help that echo through social media and public spaces. These admissions often include reflections on how the push for absolute independence ignored biological and practical realities, how celebrating single life overlooked the loneliness that can accompany it, and how dismissing men as unnecessary created a vacuum that no amount of career success could fill when crises arise. Men observe this from afar, continuing their routines of disciplined living, financial prudence, and personal development, recognizing that returning to old dynamics would mean re entering systems that previously extracted more than they gave. Yet the story is not one of triumph for men alone, but of a broader reckoning with choices made over generations. The economy's collapse under inflation and mismanagement has merely exposed fault lines that existed long before. When women publicly beg for assistance, it highlights not just financial hardship, but the failure of narratives that promised empowerment without interdependence. Men have responded by building lives of quiet luxury defined by freedom, health, and security rather than relational obligation. They invest in stocks, real estate, or side ventures that build wealth steadily, travel to experience the world on their terms, maintain fitness regimens that ensure longevity, and cultivate friendships based on mutual respect rather than utility. This approach yields a level of contentment that many women now envy, as evidenced by increasing online discussions where women question the path they were encouraged to follow. The contrast is stark. Men sleep soundly, knowing their efforts compound positively, while women confront the reality that independence without support networks leaves them exposed when systems falter. This dynamic will likely intensify as economic pressures mount, with more men choosing solitude over sacrifice and more women facing the full weight of promises that proved hollow. The pattern repeats across cultures, adapting similar modern ideals. In China, matchmaking events show extreme imbalances where women vastly outnumber men. Yet standards remain sky high with demands for housing, cars, and provision, despite economic realities making such expectations unattainable for most. Men there too withdraw, preferring to avoid burdens like massive bride prices or ongoing financial demands that leave them drained. Similar trends appear in Western contexts where dating apps amplify superficial judgments, social media inflates egos, and feminism's legacy fosters entitlement without reciprocity. Men adapt by focusing inward, building resilience against a world that once demanded endless output without appreciation. Women, caught in the squeeze of rising costs and declining opportunities, begin to voice what was once taboo, that the independence sold as liberation has instead delivered hardship and regret. This is the price of arrogance unchecked, of dehumanizing half the population for decades, of weaponizing ideology against natural dynamics. Men are not rushing to rescue because they have learned the value of their own peace, and that lesson runs deep. The economic pressures that have forced this divide into sharp relief are not random accidents, but the predictable outcome of decades of policy decisions that prioritized short term gains over long term stability. Central banks printed money at unprecedented rates to prop up failing systems, leading to asset bubbles in real estate and stocks that benefited those who already owned property or had capital while crushing those trying to enter the market. Wages stagnated even as productivity soared, meaning workers produced more but captured less of the value they created. Governments expanded social programs and entitlements without corresponding increases in productive capacity, creating massive deficits that future generations would have to pay through higher taxes or inflation. In this environment, traditional family formation became a luxury good rather than a default path. Men, recognizing the financial risks of marriage under no fault divorce laws that often favor women in asset division and child custody, began calculating the costs and benefits with cold precision. The potential loss of half their net worth, ongoing alimony payments, child support obligations that could last decades, and limited access to their own children created a risk profile that many found unacceptable. Instead of accepting these terms, they chose to opt out entirely, focusing resources on themselves rather than on building a family unit that could be dismantled by courts at any moment. This decision was not born of bitterness, but of rational self preservation in a system that had become demonstrably hostile to male interests. Women, meanwhile, were encouraged by cultural and institutional voices to pursue careers above all else, to delay marriage and children until their 30s or 40s, and to view men primarily as optional accessories rather than essential partners. The message was clear: you can have it all on your terms without compromise. Yet biology and economics refused to bend to ideology. Fertility declines sharply after age 30, making it harder to start families later, while career demands often conflict with the realities of raising children. When economic downturns hit, women who had banked on dual incomes or government support found themselves exposed. Single motherhood rates climbed, with many women raising children alone on incomes that barely covered necessities, let alone luxuries. The feminist narrative that had promised liberation through independence now faced the harsh test of reality, and many women discovered that going it alone meant struggling alone. Public expressions of regret began to appear more frequently, with women openly questioning whether the trade offs they made were worth the outcome. They spoke of exhaustion from juggling demanding jobs with single parenting, of loneliness that no amount of social media validation could alleviate, of financial strain that grew heavier with each passing year. These admissions often carried an undertone of betrayal, as if the promises made to them had been false advertising. Yet the same voices that had once celebrated these choices now offered little in the way of practical solutions beyond more government intervention or more shaming of men who refused to participate. Men, observing this unfolding drama from the safety of their own well ordered lives, felt no obligation to intervene. They had spent years absorbing criticism, adapting to changing expectations, and ultimately concluding that the game was rigged against them. Dating apps turned courtship into a numbers game where only the top tier of men received attention, while average men were invisible. Social media amplified female hypergamy, creating unrealistic standards that most men could never meet. Legal systems tilted heavily toward women in family court, where accusations alone could trigger devastating consequences without due process. Workplace environments increasingly adopted policies that viewed male behavior through a lens of suspicion, with mandatory diversity training that portrayed traditional masculinity as problematic. Faced with these realities, men did what rational actors do. They minimized exposure to risk. They stopped approaching women in public, stopped spending money on dates that often led nowhere, stopped investing emotionally in relationships that could end abruptly and expensively. Instead, they built lives of deliberate simplicity and self sufficiency. They cooked healthy meals at home, saving hundreds of dollars a month compared to eating out or paying for expensive dates. They maintained rigorous fitness routines, improving both physical health and mental clarity. They pursued education and skills that increased earning potential without the debt of useless degrees. They invested in index funds, cryptocurrencies, real estate, or side businesses that generated passive income. They traveled to countries where women still valued traditional qualities in men, where respect and appreciation were given freely rather than demanded as entitlements. This overseas option has become particularly appealing as domestic dating has grown increasingly toxic. In nations like the Philippines, Thailand, Colombia, and Eastern Europe, men report finding women who are feminine, family oriented, and genuinely appreciative of male provision and protection. The cost of living in these places is a fraction of Western standards, allowing men to stretch their dollars far further while enjoying companionship that feels reciprocal rather than extractive. A man earning a modest Western salary can live like royalty abroad, dining out frequently, traveling locally, and maintaining a comfortable lifestyle while building savings. Many men adopt a hybrid approach, working remotely for Western companies while living in lower cost countries, thus enjoying both high income and low expenses. This lifestyle yields not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom as well, free from the constant negotiation and drama that characterizes many Western relationships. When men return home, they do so refreshed, with renewed appreciation for their solitude and no desire to re enter the domestic dating market. Women who observe this trend sometimes express envy or frustration, yet rarely acknowledge the role their own behavior played in driving men away. Instead, they often double down on demands, insisting that men should return to traditional roles without the traditional respect or reciprocity. The broader societal impact of this withdrawal cannot be overstated. Birth rates in Western nations have fallen below replacement levels, leading to aging populations and shrinking workforces. Governments respond with increased immigration, but cultural cohesion suffers when large numbers of newcomers arrive without shared values or integration. Economic growth slows as fewer young people enter the labor market, while entitlement programs strain under the weight of more retirees than contributors. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Marriage rates plummet, cohabitation becomes the norm, yet these arrangements offer even less stability than traditional marriage. Children raised in single parent homes, overwhelmingly by mothers, face higher risks of poverty, poor educational outcomes, and behavioral problems. The cycle continues as boys growing up without positive male role models struggle to become responsible men, while girls learn that men are optional or unreliable. Society begins to fracture along gender lines, with increasing resentment and mistrust between men and women. Men retreat further into their own spaces, creating parallel economies and communities that exclude women entirely. Online forums, gaming communities, and hobby groups become male dominated sanctuaries where men can interact without fear of judgment or legal repercussions. Women, facing increasing isolation, turn to social media for validation, posting content designed to attract attention from the very men they once dismissed, yet finding fewer takers as men grow indifferent. This indifference represents perhaps the most profound change. Men who once sought female approval now seek self approval. They measure success by their own standards: financial independence, physical fitness, mental clarity, personal fulfillment. They no longer need external validation from women to feel worthy. This shift in psychology marks a fundamental realignment of power dynamics. When women could rely on male desire for provision and protection, they held significant leverage. Now that men have learned to thrive without female companionship, that leverage evaporates. Women find themselves competing for the attention of a shrinking pool of willing men, many of whom have already decided that peace is preferable to partnership. The result is a growing chorus of pleas, complaints, and accusations directed at men who refuse to play the game. Women speak of male immaturity, selfishness, fear of commitment, yet these criticisms fall on deaf ears. Men have heard them all before and concluded that the criticisms themselves are evidence that the system remains broken. If men were truly the problem, women would not be begging for their return. The very existence of these pleas confirms what men have long suspected. Women need men more than men need women, at least in the traditional sense of provision and protection. This realization has profound implications for the future of gender relations. If current trends continue, we may see the emergence of a permanent underclass of single women struggling financially, while single men enjoy relative prosperity and freedom. Governments may attempt to intervene through policies designed to encourage marriage and family formation, but such efforts are likely to fail if they do not address the underlying grievances that drove men away in the first place. Legal reforms to make divorce fairer, to protect men from false accusations, to ensure equal parenting rights, to reduce financial incentives for single motherhood would be necessary first steps. Yet political will for such reforms remains weak, as women constitute the majority of voters and tend to support policies that favor female interests. The result may be continued polarization, with men withdrawing further and women facing increasing hardship. Some women will adapt by lowering standards, seeking genuine partnership rather than provision, but many will continue to demand what they believe they are entitled to, only to find fewer men willing to pay the price. In the meantime, men continue to build lives of quiet abundance. They wake up without drama, pursue goals without compromise, travel without permission, spend without justification. They maintain strong bodies through consistent training, sharp minds through continuous learning, and healthy finances through disciplined saving and investing. They form friendships with other men who share their values, creating support networks that provide companionship without the risks of romantic entanglement. They adopt pets that offer unconditional love without demands. They cultivate hobbies that bring genuine joy and satisfaction. They experience the world on their own terms, free from the expectations that once constrained them. This lifestyle, once seen as lonely or defeatist, is increasingly recognized as optimal for male flourishing in the current environment. Men who once feared being alone now embrace solitude as a gift, a space for growth and peace that relationships often disrupted. They look at the struggles of single women not with schadenfreude, but with detachment, recognizing that each person reaps what they sow. Women chose independence, and now they experience its full consequences. Men chose self reliance, and now they experience its rewards. The contrast could not be more stark. While women post about struggling to pay rent, men post about achieving financial independence. While women lament the lack of good men, men celebrate the abundance of time and money that comes from single life. While women express regret over career focused 20s, men express gratitude for avoiding early marriage traps. The narratives diverge completely, reflecting fundamentally different life experiences. Women who once mocked men for playing video games now see those same men living comfortably while they face eviction notices. Women who once declared they did not need men now openly admit they do, yet find the offer withdrawn. This reversal of fortunes represents a form of natural justice, where actions have consequences and choices lead to outcomes. Men did not create the conditions that drove them away. They merely responded to those conditions in the most rational way possible. Women, having championed those conditions, must now live with the results. As economic pressures intensify, the divide will likely widen further. Inflation will continue to erode purchasing power, housing costs will remain unaffordable for most, and job security will become even more precarious. Men, already adapted to frugality and self sufficiency, will weather these storms better than women who relied on dual incomes or government support. Single men will continue to thrive in relative comfort, while single women face increasing desperation. The pleas for help will grow louder, the regrets more explicit, yet the response from men will remain consistent: silence, indifference, and continued withdrawal. This is not cruelty, but consequence. Men have learned that their peace is non negotiable, that their resources are finite, and that their well being must come first. They have made their choice, and they are not looking back. The consequences of this widespread male withdrawal ripple outward in ways that reshape entire communities and national economies over time. When large numbers of men stop participating in the conventional dating and marriage markets, the institutions built around those markets begin to contract and weaken. Wedding industries that once generated billions in revenue from ceremonies, receptions, honeymoons, and related services now face declining demand as fewer couples form and commit long term. Real estate markets that depended on young families purchasing starter homes see slower turnover and softer prices in suburban areas once dominated by dual income households. Retail sectors tied to courtship, from restaurants and bars to jewelry stores and luxury fashion brands marketed toward impressing potential partners, experience reduced foot traffic and sales as men redirect their discretionary spending toward personal development, travel, equipment for hobbies, or investments that build wealth rather than temporary experiences. Entertainment venues that thrived on mixed gender socializing, such as nightclubs and dating oriented events, find their customer bases shrinking as men prefer solitary or male only pursuits that carry lower emotional and financial risk. This economic contraction hits hardest in sectors that historically profited from male provision and female consumption patterns, creating job losses that further strain already fragile local economies. Governments notice the slowdown in tax revenue from these industries and respond with increased borrowing or tax hikes on remaining earners, which in turn accelerates the very cost of living pressures that originally drove men to simplify their lifestyles and withdraw from high expense dating. At the same time, demographic shifts compound the problem in ways few predicted when the cultural push for female independence gained momentum. Fertility rates continue their steep decline across developed nations, dropping well below the replacement level needed to sustain populations without massive immigration. Japan, South Korea, Italy, Spain, and increasingly the United States and Canada illustrate the pattern vividly. Aging societies with shrinking workforces supporting growing retiree populations through strained pension and healthcare systems. When fewer children are born because fewer stable partnerships form, the dependency ratio worsens dramatically. By mid century projections show some countries facing situations where 2 or 3 working age adults support every retiree, inversion of historical norms that places enormous fiscal pressure on younger generations already burdened by student debt, stagnant wages, and unaffordable housing. Men who have chosen singlehood contribute to this trend not out of malice, but because they see little incentive to bring children into a world where family courts routinely separate fathers from offspring, where child support obligations can exceed reasonable capacity to pay, and where cultural narratives continue to frame fathers primarily as financial ATMs rather than equal parents. Women who delay childbearing until career stability arrives often discover that window has closed biologically, leading to rising rates of involuntary childlessness and the emotional toll that accompanies it. Public health data increasingly document higher instances of depression, anxiety, and substance use among middle aged single women compared to their male counterparts, who report greater life satisfaction from structured routines of fitness, work, and leisure unencumbered by relational obligations. This asymmetry in emotional and psychological outcomes deserves closer examination because it reveals how deeply the cultural experiment in redefining gender roles has altered individual well being. Men who embrace purposeful solitude develop routines that reinforce resilience and contentment. Daily resistance training builds not only muscle, but also discipline and self efficacy. Consistent sleep schedules sharpen cognitive function and emotional regulation. Cooking nutrient dense meals at home fosters both physical health and financial control. Reading, learning new skills, or mastering complex hobbies provides intrinsic rewards that no external validation can match. Social connections form through shared interests rather than romantic pursuit, creating lower drama friendships that endure without the volatility often present in heterosexual relationships under modern conditions. Travel becomes feasible and enjoyable when expenses remain modest and decisions rest solely with the individual. These elements combine to produce a virtuous cycle of improvement where each small gain reinforces the next, leading to steadily rising life quality even amid broader societal decline. Women attempting similar self focused lifestyles frequently encounter structural barriers that men largely avoid. Caregiving responsibilities for aging parents fall disproportionately on daughters, consuming time, energy, and money that could otherwise support personal growth or financial security. Biological realities around reproduction create time pressure that men do not face in the same way. Social expectations still subtly pressure women toward partnership and motherhood, even while publicly celebrating independence, producing internal conflict absent in men who have fully accepted singlehood as their default state. The online discourse surrounding these developments further illuminates the growing chasm. Platforms once dominated by feminist messaging now host increasing numbers of threads where women candidly describe their disillusionment with the independence narrative. They detail the exhaustion of maintaining careers while handling all domestic responsibilities alone, the sting of watching male peers accumulate savings and freedom while their own net worth stagnates or declines, the loneliness that creeps in when social circles shrink after friends pair off or move away. Some openly admit that the rhetoric they once embraced now feels like a bait and switch, promising liberation but delivering isolation when economic headwinds arrive. Others express frustration at the apparent indifference of men who once pursued them, but now seem content without female company. These conversations rarely lead to introspection about how collective female behavior contributed to male disengagement. Instead, blame often shifts towards men for failing to adapt, for being too sensitive, for refusing to fulfill traditional roles despite changed conditions. Men reading these discussions typically respond with either silence or brief affirmations that their peace remains non negotiable. The absence of widespread outrage or counter mobilization among men stands as perhaps the strongest evidence of genuine detachment. Where earlier generations might have protested or organized, current cohorts simply disengage, redirecting energy toward personal advancement and letting societal outcomes unfold without interference. Policy responses to these trends remain inadequate because they rarely address root causes. Governments propose subsidies for childcare, paid family leave, housing vouchers, or tax credits for families, yet these measures treat symptoms rather than the underlying mistrust between genders. Legal systems continue operating under frameworks designed decades ago when economic and social conditions differed markedly. No fault divorce, combined with presumptive maternal custody and generous support awards, creates disincentives for men to marry or cohabitate long term. False accusation risks in workplace and campus environments deter casual interactions that once led to relationships. Cultural messaging persists in portraying traditional male provider instincts as patriarchal relics rather than valuable contributions worthy of respect. Until reforms tackle these structural issues directly, male withdrawal will likely deepen rather than reverse. Some jurisdictions experiment with modest changes, such as shared parenting presumptions or caps on alimony duration, but progress remains slow against entrenched interests that benefit from current arrangements. In the interim, men continue adapting by internationalizing their options, building portable careers, minimizing legal exposure, and cultivating lives insulated from domestic volatility. The international dimension of this phenomenon grows more pronounced each year. Western men increasingly view overseas relationships as viable alternatives rather than exotic outliers. Digital nomad visas, remote work proliferation, and affordable air travel make relocation feasible for middle class earners. Countries with lower living costs and cultures that maintain traditional courtship norms attract men seeking value alignment absent at home. Women in these regions often express appreciation for stability, loyalty, and provision that Western counterparts increasingly frame as entitlement or oppression. The resulting partnerships frequently produce higher reported satisfaction for both parties because expectations match realities more closely. Children raised in such environments benefit from two parent households with complementary roles rather than the single parent struggles common in the West. Some men maintain dual bases, spending portions of the year abroad while keeping Western citizenship and income sources. Others relocate permanently, integrating into new societies while enjoying lifestyles unattainable back home. This brain drain of productive men further weakens Western economies already facing talent shortages in technical fields. Women left behind encounter a progressively narrower pool of marriageable men, many of whom have either emigrated or opted out entirely. Economic modeling suggests these trends will accelerate under continued inflationary pressure and wage stagnation. When basic shelter and nutrition consume larger portions of income, discretionary spending on courtship collapses first among lower and middle earners. Men prioritize survival and accumulation over consumption signaling. Women reliant on male financial support find fewer partners willing or able to provide it. The resulting feedback loop intensifies gender economic divergence. Single men build wealth through compounding investments and expense control. Single women deplete savings covering emergencies, medical costs, or parental care without equivalent income buffers. Over decades, this disparity manifests in retirement statistics, showing single women far more likely to face poverty in old age. Social safety nets strain under increased claims, while tax bases shrink from lower marriage and fertility rates. Governments face difficult choices between raising taxes on remaining workers, cutting benefits, or encouraging immigration that brings its own integration challenges. None of these options restore the conditions that once supported widespread family formation. Men observing these macro developments from their individual vantage points feel no compulsion to re engage with a system that penalizes participation. They have internalized the lesson that peace carries higher value than partnership under current terms. Daily life revolves around controllable variables: training schedules, meal preparation, skill acquisition, asset allocation, travel planning. Uncertainty diminishes when external dependencies vanish. Relationships introduce variables beyond personal control, from partner moods to legal risks to financial demands. By eliminating those variables, men reclaim agency in an era when agency feels increasingly scarce elsewhere. This reclamation produces measurable improvements in health markers, financial trajectories, and self reported happiness. Longitudinal studies of never married men in their 40s and 50s show lower rates of certain stress related illnesses compared to divorced or unhappily married peers. Financial independence arrives earlier when resources concentrate on self rather than shared households with high overhead. Life satisfaction surveys increasingly capture a subset of men who describe their single status as deliberate choice rather than circumstance, contrasting sharply with women in similar demographics who more often describe singlehood as unwanted outcome. The philosophical underpinning of the shift deserves attention because it represents a fundamental reorientation of male identity. Earlier generations defined manhood partly through provision, protection, and family leadership. Contemporary men increasingly define it through self mastery, independence, and personal mission. The provider role loses appeal when provision risks seizure through legal mechanisms without corresponding authority or appreciation. Protection loses meaning when approached as threat rather than virtue. Leadership becomes irrelevant when followership evaporates. In place of these traditional markers, men substitute mastery of body through training, mastery of mind through learning, mastery of resources through investing, mastery of time through intentional living. This internal locus of value frees men from external judgment and creates resilience against cultural disapproval. When society labels such men immature or selfish, they experience the label as confirmation that external opinion no longer dictates self worth. Detachment from approval seeking allows authentic priorities to surface without distortion. Women confronting this new reality face a steeper adaptation curve. Cultural permission structures still encourage high standards in partner selection, while economic realities shrink the pool of men meeting those standards. The contradiction produces cognitive dissonance resolved either through lowered expectations or increased frustration. Those choosing the former sometimes find stable partnerships with men who value reciprocity over one sided provision. Those clinging to the latter amplify public complaints that further alienate remaining men. The cycle reinforces itself until economic necessity forces broader reevaluation. When basic survival hangs in balance, ideological purity often yields to pragmatism. Yet pragmatism arrives later for women conditioned to view compromise as defeat rather than maturity. Men conditioned to view withdrawal as self preservation reach that point sooner and hold it longer. Looking forward, the most likely trajectory involves continued bifurcation. A minority of men and women will negotiate mutually beneficial arrangements based on realistic expectations and mutual respect. The majority will sort into separate paths: men toward disciplined solitude and selective international engagement, women toward increased reliance on state support, female social networks, or reluctant compromise. Society will adjust to lower marriage rates, lower birth rates, higher singlehood rates, and greater gender economic disparity. Cultural narratives will evolve slowly as lived experience contradicts earlier promises. Eventually, acknowledgement may emerge that interdependence serve both sexes better than absolute independence under modern economic conditions. Until then, men will continue walking away, building lives of quiet strength while the structures built on old assumptions creak under their own weight. The institutional inertia that sustains outdated gender dynamics becomes increasingly apparent when examining how educational systems continue to produce graduates mismatched with current economic realities. Universities expanded dramatically over the past half century, promising that higher education would guarantee upward mobility and personal fulfillment regardless of major or market demand. Women enrolled in record numbers, often pursuing fields in social sciences, humanities, communications, education, and various liberal arts disciplines that aligned with cultural encouragement toward self expression and helping professions. These degrees frequently led to entry level positions with limited earning potential, high competition, and little opportunity for rapid advancement compared to STEM or trade pathways that remained male dominated. The resulting debt to income ratios for many female graduates reached unsustainable levels, with monthly payments consuming portions of salary that could otherwise build savings or cover rising rent in urban centers where most desirable jobs clustered. Men, meanwhile, gravitated toward field offering clearer paths to financial independence. Engineering, computer science, skilled trades, finance, logistics, and entrepreneurship, where demand remained robust and compensation reflected scarcity of talent. This divergence in educational and career choices amplified economic asymmetry over time. By their late 20s and early 30s, men in these practical fields often achieved home ownership, investment portfolios, and debt free status, while women with comparable years of schooling carried heavier student loans, lower median salaries, and greater vulnerability to layoffs in sectors sensitive to economic cycles. The promise that education alone would equalize outcomes ignored both biological differences in occupational preferences and the hard realities of supply and demand in labor markets. When inflation accelerated and remote work options expanded, men leveraged portable skills to relocate to lower cost areas or work internationally, preserving purchasing power and accelerating wealth accumulation. Women tied to location specific roles in education, healthcare administration, nonprofit sectors, or corporate support functions found mobility constrained, locking them into high cost environments where wages failed to keep pace with expense. This educational mismatch feeds directly into housing patterns that further entrench the divide. Major metropolitan areas where women disproportionately seek career opportunities in media, marketing, government, and creative industries maintain severe housing shortages driven by zoning restrictions, environmental regulations, and investor purchases of single family homes for rental conversion. As the average rents in these cities consume 40 to 60% of median female incomes in many cases, leaving little margin for savings, emergencies, or discretionary spending. Men who enter trades or tech often secure employment in secondary cities, rural areas with growing industrial bases, or fully remote positions that allow residence in affordable regions. A software developer or electrician earning comparable pay to a marketing coordinator can afford a mortgage on a three-bedroom house in a mid-sized market, while the latter struggles to cover a one-bedroom apartment in a coastal hub. The home ownership gap widens accordingly, with single men in their 30s showing higher rates of property ownership than single women in the same age bracket across multiple national datasets. Owning property provides not only shelter stability, but also forced savings through principal paydown, tax advantages, and potential appreciation that builds net worth over decades. Renters, disproportionately female in urban single populations, accumulate no equity and face perpetual increases that outstrip wage growth. When economic shocks occur, job loss, medical emergency, or family caregiving needs, the absence of owned assets leaves women with fewer buffers, increasing reliance on credit cards, family loans, or public assistance. Men with property can weather downturns by refinancing, renting out rooms, or selling at a profit to relocate, preserving capital while adapting. This asset disparity compounds across generations as homeowners pass wealth to children through inheritance, while lifelong renters leave little beyond debt. The feminist emphasis on career independence overlooked how deeply housing markets, shaped by policy and geography, interact with occupational choices to create gendered economic vulnerability. Family court outcomes represent another layer of institutional risk that continues to drive male disengagement from long term commitment. Despite incremental reforms in some jurisdictions, the default presumption in many divorce and custody proceedings still tilts toward maternal primary custody, particularly for children under school age. Child support calculations often use income based formulas that fail to account for actual parenting time, direct expenses borne by the paying parent, or changes in circumstances such as job loss. Alimony awards, though declining in duration in progressive states, remain common enough to create lifetime financial obligations for men who married in their 20s or 30s. The combination produces a lottery like risk profile. A man entering marriage faces potential loss of half his assets accumulated during the union, ongoing payments that can exceed 50% of take home pay in extreme cases, and severely limited contact with children if the ex spouse relocates or obstructs access. False allegations of abuse, though statistically rare in adjudicated cases, carry outsized consequences because restraining orders issue quickly on low evidentiary thresholds, triggering immediate removal from the home and restricted child access pending hearings that can take months. These systemic features, designed originally to protect vulnerable parties, now operate in an environment where incentives encourage their strategic use in contentious separations. Men respond by avoiding the institution altogether. Marriage rates among those under 40 have fallen to historic lows, with cohabitation serving as a lower commitment alternative that still carries many of the same financial risks without legal protections. Prenuptial agreements offer partial mitigation, but face judicial scrutiny and social stigma, and many women refuse them outright as signals of distrust. The rational calculus for men becomes straightforward when the downside risk vastly exceeds the upside benefit in an era of easy exit through no fault statutes. The optimal strategy is non participation. Women who desire marriage find themselves competing for a shrinking cohort of men willing to accept the terms, while men who once viewed family as central to identity now see it as an optional, high risk endeavor. Cultural messaging reinforces these institutional disincentives by maintaining a bifurcated narrative around gender roles. Media portrayals continue to celebrate female autonomy and ambition, while simultaneously depicting traditional male provision as either outdated or potentially abusive. Sitcoms, reality television, and social media influencers routinely frame men who prioritize career, fitness, or personal hobbies as emotionally unavailable or immature, while women who express desire for partnership receive sympathy as victims of male failure. This one sided framing ignores the reciprocal nature of healthy relationships and the legitimate grievances men carry from past experiences with family law, workplace bias, and social shaming. When public discourse acknowledges male withdrawal at all, explanations default to blaming porn consumption, video game addiction, extended adolescence, or misogyny rather than examining structural factors that make commitment unattractive. The result is a feedback loop where women feel increasingly entitled to provision without corresponding obligations, while men feel increasingly justified in withholding it. Genuine dialogue about mutual expectations rarely occurs because the conversation remains polarized between camps that either demand male return to traditional roles or celebrate male liberation from them. Neutral ground shrinks as each side entrenches further, leaving practical solutions, fairer courts, realistic cultural narratives, economic policies that support family formation, politically unpalatable. Technological changes accelerate the separation by providing men with alternative avenues for fulfillment that bypass traditional relational pathways. Streaming services deliver endless entertainment tailored to individual tastes without social interaction. Online communities centered on fitness, finance, gaming, woodworking, automotive restoration, or intellectual pursuits offer camaraderie without romantic complications. Dating applications, initially designed to facilitate connections, instead revealed stark imbalances in attention distribution and fostered cynicism through ghosting, flaking, and superficial judgments. Men who experienced repeated rejection or exploitation of resources withdrew from the ecosystem entirely, redirecting energy toward pursuits with higher return on investment. Artificial intelligence companions, though still emerging, already provide conversational engagement and emotional simulation without the demands or risks of human relationships. Virtual reality environments create immersive social spaces where men interact as avatars, achieving status and connection without physical presence or legal exposure. These technologies reduce the opportunity cost of solitude by filling voids once occupied exclusively by partnership. Women, while also using these tools, tend to seek them as supplements rather than substitutes for real world connection, maintaining higher expectations for in person relationships even as options narrow. The technological divergence mirrors the economic one. Men leverage tools for self sufficiency. Women often use them to broadcast availability to a diminishing audience. And international comparisons highlight how deeply cultural and legal environments shape these outcomes. In nations that preserved stronger legal protections for marriage through fault based divorce, equitable custody presumptions, or cultural stigma against unilateral dissolution, marriage rates remain higher and gender economic gaps narrower. Societies that emphasize family honor and intergenerational obligation similarly retain higher partnership formation despite modern economic pressures. Western jurisdictions that maximized individual autonomy through expansive, no fault systems and gender neutral but practically asymmetric family law experienced the sharpest declines in family stability and the clearest evidence of male withdrawal. This variation suggests outcomes stem less from inevitable progress than from specific policy choices that prioritized short term individual freedom over long term social cohesion. Nations now grappling with demographic collapse experiment with incentives, baby bonuses, housing subsidies for young families, extended parental leave, but results remain modest when underlying mistrust persists. Men in these environments continue assessing risk versus reward and often conclude that singlehood abroad or disciplined isolation at home offers superior outcomes to domestic partnership under prevailing conditions. The philosophical shift among men toward radical self responsibility represents perhaps the most enduring change. Earlier conceptions of masculinity tied identity to external roles: provider, protector, leader, husband, father. Contemporary men increasingly anchor identity internally through demonstrated competence, discipline, and autonomy. Mastery becomes the metric. Mastering one's body through consistent training, mastering one's finances through deliberate allocation, mastering one's time through intentional scheduling, mastering one's environment through minimalism and mobility. External markers lose salience when internal validation proves more reliable and less revocable. Society may label this inward turn as narcissism or avoidance, but participants experience it as liberation from chronic performance pressure and conditional approval. When approval depends on perpetual provision, emotional labor, or conformity to shifting expectations, withdrawal becomes rational self defense. Men discover that solitude, far from empty, provides space for authentic growth unmediated by relational compromise. The absence of constant negotiation allows energy, once dissipated in conflict resolution, to compound into personal capital: physical, intellectual, financial. This internal reorientation proves remarkably resilient because it relies on variables within personal control rather than unpredictable external actors. Women navigating the same landscape confront a different set of constraints. Social conditioning still links female worth partly to relational success and motherhood, creating pressure absent in men who have decoupled worth from partnership. Biological clocks impose finite timelines on family formation that men largely escape. Caregiving burdens for both children and parents fall heavier on women, even in dual earner households, let alone single ones. The combination produces higher rates of burnout, anxiety disorders, and regret narratives among single women in their 40s and beyond. Public expressions of this regret often meet dismissal or redirection toward blaming men rather than reevaluating collective choices. The reluctance to acknowledge trade offs made in pursuit of independence delays adaptation. Women who do adapt by prioritizing compatibility over status, embracing reciprocity, relocating to more balanced markets, sometimes achieve stable partnerships, but they represent exceptions in an environment where hypergamous tendencies remain culturally reinforced. The majority continue searching within shrinking pools, amplifying frustration when results disappoint. Economic forecasts indicate these patterns will intensify before any reversal becomes plausible. Persistent inflation, automation displacing white collar administrative roles disproportionately held by women, and rising energy costs will further erode purchasing power for location bound earners. Men with portable skills and asset bases will maintain or improve living standards through geographic arbitrage and investment income. Women dependent on urban salary employment and rental housing will face compounding erosion of security. Government interventions, universal basic income proposals, expanded welfare, subsidized childcare may blunt the sharpest edges, but cannot restore incentives for male participation, absent fundamental legal and cultural reforms. In the absence of such reforms, the gender economic bifurcation will likely harden into semi permanent structural feature of advanced economies. Men will continue refining lives of purposeful independence. Women will continue grappling with the full cost of autonomy without adequate support systems. And society will adapt to lower fertility, slower growth, and deeper polarization. The experiment in redefining relational fundamentals continues, with outcomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The technological acceleration that has reshaped daily existence plays a particularly decisive role in solidifying male independence from traditional relational structures. High speed internet combined with powerful personal computing devices has democratized access to knowledge, entertainment, and community in ways unimaginable even 20 years ago. A single man with a stable internet connection can now access university level lectures from elite institutions for free, follow detailed tutorials on any skill from advanced programming to gourmet cooking to home renovation, participate in global forums discussing finance and investment strategies, and maintain friendships across continents without ever leaving his residence. This infrastructure eliminates many of the practical dependencies that once made partnership attractive or necessary. Where previous generations needed wives for domestic organization, meal preparation, emotional support during difficult periods, or social coordination, modern technology provides substitutes that are reliable, non judgmental, and available on demand. Meal delivery services, robotic vacuum cleaners, smart home systems, grocery subscription boxes, and AI powered personal assistants handle logistical burdens with minimal effort. Mental health applications, meditation guides, journaling prompts, and online therapy platforms offer emotional regulation tools without requiring vulnerability to another person who might later weaponize that information in conflict or legal proceedings. The cumulative effect removes friction from solitary living while simultaneously raising the bar for what a romantic partner must contribute to justify the added complexity, risk, and expense. When a relationship introduces drama, financial demands, potential legal exposure, or emotional labor that exceeds the benefits provided, technology makes the comparison starkly unfavorable. Men increasingly conclude that the incremental value a partner brings fails to offset the substantial costs, particularly when baseline life quality already reaches high levels through self directed systems. This technological self sufficiency intersects powerfully with the financial independence movement that has gained momentum among men in their 20s and 30s. The FIRE community, financial independence, retire early, originally attracted a broad demographic, but now skews heavily male in practice, especially among those who remain single. By living frugally, maximizing savings rates to 50% or more of income, investing aggressively in low cost index funds, real estate investment trusts, dividend stocks, or peer to peer lending platforms, many men achieve the ability to cover living expenses through passive income streams well before traditional retirement age. The absence of dependence accelerates this timeline dramatically. No children mean no school fees, no college savings goals, no extracurricular expenses. No spouse means no pressure to maintain appearances through expensive housing, vehicles, vacations, or status purchases. The math becomes straightforward and compelling. A single man earning a median professional salary can save enough in 10 to 15 years to generate 4% annual withdrawals sufficient to cover modest but comfortable living indefinitely. Once that threshold is crossed, the incentive to tolerate relational stress diminishes to near zero. Freedom from the need to earn becomes freedom from the need to compromise. Men in this position report profound psychological relief upon reaching financial escape velocity. They no longer view work as obligatory drudgery, but as optional activity chosen for stimulation or additional security. They travel for months at a time, relocate seasonally to pleasant climates, pursue passions without schedule constraints, and maintain health through consistent routines rather than reactive crisis management. The contrast with women who remain tethered to employment through higher fixed costs, caregiving responsibilities, or debt service obligations grows more pronounced with each passing year. Women attempting similar financial strategies face steeper hurdles, biological timelines that limit career flexibility, societal pressure toward consumption signaling in dating contexts, and statistical likelihood of interrupted earning years due to child rearing even in hypothetical partnerships. The result is a widening chasm in lifetime wealth accumulation that technology and discipline habits have made achievable for men, but structurally difficult for women under current conditions. Health and longevity outcomes further reinforce the appeal of solitary disciplined living among men. Access to abundant information about nutrition, exercise physiology, sleep science, and preventive medicine allows motivated individuals to optimize physical condition far beyond what was possible for previous generations, relying solely on medical professionals. Men who commit to progressive overload resistance training, zone 2 cardio, mobility work, and recovery protocols often achieve body compositions, strength levels, and energy profiles that rival or exceed those of men half their age. Consistent 8-hour sleep schedules protected from relational disruption produce measurable improvements in cognitive function, immune response, and hormonal balance. Diets emphasizing whole foods, adequate protein, healthy fats, and micronutrient density reduce inflammation markers and disease risk profiles dramatically. Wearable technology tracks these variables in real time, providing data driven feedback loops that reinforce positive behaviors. The psychological benefits compound alongside the physical ones. Regular exercise releases endorphins and endocannabinoids that stabilize mood without chemical intervention. Mastery of the body builds confidence that spills over into other domains. Visible progress provides tangible evidence of agency in an era when many external systems feel uncontrollable. Men report sleeping better, thinking more clearly, recovering from setbacks faster, and facing daily challenges with equanimity that relationships frequently disrupted. Women who pursue similar optimization face different biological starting points and greater time demands from caregiving roles, resulting in lower average adherence to rigorous protocols over long periods. The health gap manifests in actuarial data, showing single men in their 40s and 50s experiencing lower rates of certain preventable conditions compared to single women in equivalent demographics, despite popular assumptions that marriage universally benefits male longevity. When men observe these outcomes in themselves and their peers, the motivation to maintain solitary discipline strengthens further, creating a self reinforcing cycle of improvement that partnership would likely interrupt. The entrepreneurial dimension of male withdrawal deserves separate consideration because it represents both cause and consequence of the broader trend. Men who opt out of conventional dating and family formation often redirect the energy, time, and capital that would have gone into those areas toward business creation or side hustles. The absence of relational obligations provides uninterrupted focus for building products, learning marketing, testing markets, and scaling operations. Many successful online businesses, e commerce stores, content creation channels, software tools, consulting practices emerge from precisely this demographic of single men in their 20s through 40s who treat entrepreneurship as both income generator and life purpose. The low overhead of digital enterprises aligns perfectly with minimalist living philosophies. A laptop, reliable internet, and disciplined schedule suffice to create six figure or higher revenue streams without employees, offices, or inventory in many cases. Profits compound rapidly when personal expenses remain low and reinvestment rates stay high. Success in these ventures further reduces dependence on traditional employment structures that often impose diversity mandates, sensitivity training, or environments perceived as hostile to male communication styles. Financial autonomy achieved through entrepreneurship grants even greater freedom to ignore cultural pressure toward partnership. Men who reach this level frequently describe a tipping point where the marginal utility of additional income diminishes while the value of time sovereignty increases exponentially. At that juncture, relationships appear not as enhancements, but as potential threats to carefully constructed autonomy. The entrepreneurial path thus becomes another layer of insulation, making re engagement with conventional dating markets even less probable. Social dynamics within male peer groups evolve in response to these changes, creating parallel support structures that reduce the perceived need for female companionship. Gym communities, online fitness forums, local meetups for hiking or martial arts, disc golf groups, shooting ranges, car clubs, and similar interest based gatherings provide camaraderie, competition, mentorship, and laughter without romantic complications. These spaces operate on implicit understandings that prioritize mutual respect, shared effort, and low drama interaction. Conversations focus on tangible achievements, personal records lifted, investments performing well, travel experiences, skill progression, rather than emotional processing or status signaling through consumption. The absence of female judgment allows unfiltered expression and humor that broader society increasingly polices. Men form genuine bonds in these environments that fulfill many social needs, once met primarily through family or romantic partnerships. When crises arise, job loss, health scares, family deaths, these networks mobilize practical support, moving assistance, meal trains, financial advice, job leads, or simply consistent check ins. The reliability and reciprocity of male friendships contrast sharply with the volatility many men report in past romantic relationships. This discovery reduces loneliness narratives that once pressured men toward partnership as the default solution. Instead, intentional cultivation of male social capital becomes a deliberate strategy for long term resilience and contentment. The cumulative impact on urban environments grows increasingly visible as male withdrawal concentrates in certain geographic patterns. Cities that once served as primary dating markets now show demographic imbalances in younger age cohorts. Neighborhoods popular with young professionals see higher concentrations of single women maintaining expensive apartments, while single men either remain in more affordable suburban or exurban areas or relocate entirely to lower cost regions or overseas. The result manifests in skewed gender ratios at social venues, dating events, and even everyday public spaces. Women report increasing difficulty finding dateable men in their immediate environments, while men in those same cities describe abundance of options but disinterest in pursuing them due to perceived risk reward imbalance. Commercial real estate adapts slowly but noticeably. Bars and restaurants that once catered to after work dating crowds downsize or reorient toward food focused concepts. Nightlife districts experience declining patronage from men who prefer home entertainment systems or occasional travel to more favorable international markets. The economic feedback loop continues as reduced male spending in these ecosystems forces closures or pivots, further diminishing the infrastructure that once facilitated casual interactions. Cities become lonelier for women who remain anchored there by career demands, while men exercise mobility to optimize quality of life across multiple dimensions: cost, climate, culture, legal environment. Looking across generational lines, the pattern suggests a self perpetuating cycle unless fundamental interventions occur. Boys raised primarily by single mothers or in father absent homes absorb different messages about masculinity and relationships than those from intact two parent households. Without positive male role models demonstrating successful provision and protection within reciprocal partnerships, many young men default to the observed reality. Single men living comfortably, partnered men often appearing stressed or diminished. Cultural products consumed by adolescent boys, gaming communities, fitness influencers, financial independence content creators reinforce self reliance as the superior path. By the time these boys reach adulthood, the decision to avoid marriage and children feels less like rebellion and more like logical continuation of observed best practices. Daughters from similar backgrounds learn different lessons: that men are unreliable or unnecessary, that career achievement defines worth, that partnership represents optional enhancement rather than foundational structure. When these cohorts meet in the dating marketplace, mutual incomprehension results. Young women maintain high standards shaped by social media and cultural messaging. Young men maintain high boundaries shaped by risk assessment and observed outcomes. The mismatch produces low formation rates, perpetuating the demographic and economic trends already underway. Breaking this cycle would require coordinated changes across education, media, law, and economic policy. Changes that current political realities make improbable in the near term. Men who fully internalize this paradigm shift describe a form of existential clarity previously associated with spiritual awakening or major life transitions. Priorities reorder decisively. Health first because it underpins everything else. Financial security second because it purchases options, meaningful work, or creative output. Third because it provides purpose. Genuine friendships fourth because they offer connection without entanglement. Everything else, status, approval, legacy through offspring, drops in importance when weighed against personal sovereignty. The resulting life structure feels streamlined, intentional, and surprisingly fulfilling. Moments of doubt occur, particularly during holidays or when peers announce engagements and births, but these pass quickly upon reflection that the observed struggles of married friends outweigh the theoretical benefits. Contentment settles in as evidence accumulates that the chosen path delivers superior outcomes across measurable domains: net worth, trajectory, physical vitality, mental sharpness, daily peace. Society may continue viewing this orientation as pathological, but participants experience it as rational adaptation to prevailing conditions. The detachment becomes permanent because the alternative, re entering a system with unchanged risks and diminished rewards, appears irrational. As these patterns solidify across populations, the broader civilizational implications grow difficult to dismiss. Declining family formation accelerates population aging, shrinks tax bases, strains entitlement systems, reduces innovation driven by young cohorts, and weakens social cohesion built on shared familial obligations. Nations respond with immigration policies that introduce cultural variables difficult to integrate at scale. Economic growth slows as consumption patterns shift from family oriented purchases to individual focused ones. Cultural narratives struggle to reconcile ideological commitments to absolute equality with emerging evidence of profound gendered divergence in outcomes. Eventually, acknowledgement may surface that interdependence, when balanced and reciprocal, produce stability that unilateral independence cannot replicate under modern economic pressures. Until that reckoning arrives, men will continue refining autonomous lives, while women confront the accumulating costs of paths once presented as liberation without qualification. The experiment proceeds, with results writing themselves in statistics, street level observations, and personal testimonies that grow harder to ignore with each passing year. The long term trajectory of these converging forces points toward a fundamental reconfiguration of Western social architecture that few architects of the original feminist and individualist revolutions anticipated or desired. When men systematically withdraw investment from the institutions of marriage, cohabitation, and biological family formation, the foundational unit that historically absorbed economic shocks, socialized children, and transmitted cultural values begins to erode at an accelerating rate. Extended family networks weaken as fewer siblings and cousins emerge to share caregiving burdens for elders. Community organizations that once relied on married couples for volunteer leadership, fundraising, and intergenerational mentoring see participation dwindle. Religious congregations, already declining for other reasons, lose additional cohesion when young adults remain single and childless rather than forming the family centered units that traditionally sustained membership across generations. Schools adjust curricula and facilities to accommodate growing numbers of children from single parent households, yet teacher burnout rises and academic outcomes stagnate in environments lacking dual parental reinforcement at home. The cumulative effect creates a society increasingly composed of atomized individuals rather than interconnected kin groups, with corresponding increases in reliance on state bureaucracies for functions once handled privately. Public pension systems, healthcare delivery, and welfare programs face mounting pressure as the ratio of contributors to beneficiaries tilts further toward dependency. Policymakers respond with incremental expansions of state authority, universal health care proposals, expanded social security nets, subsidized elder care, guaranteed minimum incomes, each measure further reducing incentives for private family formation by socializing risks that marriage once distributed internally. Men observe this shift and conclude that the state has effectively nationalized many traditional male provider functions while retaining the legal hazards of personal commitment, making withdrawal not merely rational, but almost inevitable for those capable of self provision. Within this emerging landscape, the psychological adaptation of men to permanent singlehood reaches a level of maturity that borders on philosophical detachment. Years of consistent discipline forge a mental framework where external events lose much of their power to disturb inner equilibrium. Market crashes become temporary portfolio fluctuations rather than existential threats because emergency funds and diversified holdings provide buffers. Health setbacks trigger proactive medical intervention rather than despair because baseline fitness maintains high functional capacity. Social rejection or cultural condemnation registers as background noise because self worth no longer depends on collective approval. This detachment does not equate to emotional numbness, rather, it represents refined emotional economy. Joy arises from mastery and progress, gratitude from simple abundance, compassion from recognition of shared human vulnerability, yet none of these states require relational entanglement to access. Men in this condition frequently describe a quiet awe at the elegance of a life stripped to essentials: sunlight through windows, the rhythm of breathing during meditation, the satisfaction of a completed project, the warmth of coffee on a cold morning, the steady growth of net worth displayed in monthly statements. These pleasures prove durable precisely because they remain under personal control, immune to the whims of another person or the caprice of courts. The discovery that profound contentment can exist without partnership fundamentally alters the calculus of desire. What once appeared as deprivation now reveals itself as abundance of a different order: abundance of time, attention, energy, and sovereignty. Society continues to pathologize this orientation through terms like isolation, avoidance, or arrested development, yet those living it experience the opposite: liberation from chronic performance anxiety, freedom from negotiated compromises, release from the obligation to constantly prove worth through provision or emotional labor. Women encountering this settled male detachment face a particularly acute form of cognitive dissonance when economic necessity collides with ideological commitments. Public expressions of frustration often center on the perceived selfishness of men who refuse to rescue struggling women from circumstances partly created by collective female choices over decades. Yet the same voices rarely acknowledge how thoroughly the cultural script discouraged men from viewing provision as noble rather than exploitative, protection as virtuous rather than patriarchal, leadership as admirable rather than domineering. When pleas for return go unanswered, the frustration sometimes escalates into accusations of immaturity, toxicity, or societal betrayal, framing male withdrawal as moral failing rather than adaptive response. This rhetorical strategy backfires by confirming the very perceptions that drove disengagement in the first place: that women continue to demand benefits without corresponding obligations, that criticism remains one directional, that empathy flows predominantly toward female hardship. Men, having internalized indifference as self preservation, rarely engage these arguments directly. Online forums, once filled with debate, now show increasing male silence or brief statements affirming commitment to personal peace. The absence of counter mobilization proves more powerful than any rebuttal could be. Women gradually discover that shaming, guilt tripping, or appeals to traditional duty no longer move men who have rebuilt identity around internal rather than external validation. The realization arrives unevenly. Some women adjust expectations and find reciprocal partnerships with the minority of men still open to commitment. Others double down on independence rhetoric while privately grappling with mounting isolation. Still others migrate toward subcultures that preserve traditional expectations, whether through religious communities, international relocation, or niche online spaces. The overall pattern shows fragmentation rather than unified reversal, with adaptation occurring at the individual level long before any collective reckoning materializes. Economic modeling of these divergent paths projects starkly different retirement landscapes for the current cohorts of single adults. Single men who maintained 30 to 50% savings rates through their 20s and 30s often reach financial independence between ages 40 and 55, depending on starting income and investment returns. Passive income from diversified portfolios covers baseline expenses indefinitely, allowing complete withdrawal from mandatory employment if desired. Healthcare costs remain manageable through high deductible plans paired with health savings accounts accumulated during high earning years. Housing secured early through prudent purchases appreciates over time, providing either equity for downsizing or rental income if retained. The combination yields retirement scenarios characterized by travel, hobbies, continued learning, and philanthropy rather than financial anxiety. Single women who followed the prescribed path, prioritizing career advancement, urban residence, consumption signaling during dating years, delayed family formation, frequently arrive at the same age bracket with higher debt loads, lower accumulated assets, greater likelihood of ongoing rental obligations, and reduced earning years due to caregiving interruptions, even without children of their own. Retirement projections show many facing reliance on Social Security, supplemented by part time work, shared housing arrangements, or family assistance that may not materialize. The disparity emerges not from individual moral failing, but from structural differences in risk exposure, time allocation, and incentive alignment over decades. When these projections become visible in financial planning communities and actuarial reports, they reinforce male determination to maintain course while prompting belated reconsideration among women who recognize the long tail of decisions made in their 20s. The international dimension continues expanding as a primary escape valve for men seeking alignment between expectations and reality. Digital nomad visas proliferate across Southeast Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and parts of Africa, offering renewable residency to remote workers with modest income thresholds easily met by Western salaries. Men establish bases in places where monthly costs equate to a single week of New York or San Francisco rent, allowing dramatic lifestyle elevation without income sacrifice. Local women in these regions often maintain cultural scripts that value male stability, provision within reasonable bounds, and family orientation without the overlay of Western entitlement narratives. Partnerships formed in these contexts report higher satisfaction metrics because mutual benefit remains transparent. Economic security for her, genuine companionship, and respect for him. Children born into such arrangements grow up bilingual, bicultural, and economically advantaged compared to Western single parent outcomes. Many men maintain legal ties to home countries for citizenship and banking while spending the majority of time abroad, creating hybrid lives that maximize freedom across jurisdictions. This pattern drains human capital from Western economies already facing talent shortages in technical fields as productive men vote with their feet against environments perceived as extractive toward male effort. The brain drain accelerates domestic imbalances, leaving fewer high earning men available for partnership while increasing the pool of women competing for remaining options. Governments respond with tax incentives for return migration or family formation bonuses. Yet these measures rarely address the core grievances around legal risk, cultural hostility, and value misalignment that prompted exit in the first place. At the civilizational scale, the unfolding reality challenges foundational assumptions embedded in modern liberal democracies. The belief that maximizing individual autonomy would produce optimal collective outcomes now faces empirical contradiction in the form of plummeting fertility, shrinking workforces, strained welfare states, and deepening gender economic polarization. Attempts to engineer solutions through policy alone, child tax credits, Subsidized IVF, housing grants for young families demonstrate limited efficacy when underlying trust deficits remain unaddressed. Legal reforms that equalize family court outcomes, cap lifetime support obligations, protect against unsubstantiated allegations, and recognize paternal rights presumptively would likely increase male willingness to participate. Yet such changes encounter fierce resistance from entrenched interests that benefit from current asymmetries. Cultural production continues amplifying narratives of female empowerment while rarely portraying male self sufficiency as legitimate or admirable, further entrenching the divide. The resulting stasis suggests that reversal, should it occur, will emerge from necessity rather than persuasion. When economic collapse reaches levels that make solitary male prosperity untenable, or when female hardship becomes politically unignorable. Until then, men will continue building parallel lives insulated from domestic volatility, refining systems of self reliance that prove remarkably robust against external shocks. In the final analysis, the phenomenon represents a market correction in the economy of human relationships. When terms of exchange become persistently unfavorable to one party, high risk, low reciprocity, substantial downside exposure, the rational actor reduces participation or exits entirely. Men have done precisely that, reallocating resources from a depreciating asset class to domains offering higher returns: personal health, financial capital, skill mastery, geographic mobility, philosophical clarity. The adjustment proves painful primarily for those who expected perpetual demand for their preferred terms without adaptation. Yet markets, whether financial or social, eventually equilibrate around demonstrated preferences and revealed constraints. Women who recognize this reality and adjust accordingly, embracing reciprocity, lowering superficial criteria, seeking alignment over extraction, find pathways to partnership, remain open with men who value mutual benefit over unilateral provision. Those who refuse adaptation face progressive marginalization within shrinking pools of willing participants. Society as a whole confronts the consequences of prioritizing ideological purity over pragmatic interdependence, discovering that abstract equality declarations cannot repeal biological realities, economic incentives, or legal risk profiles. The outcome unfolds not as triumph or tragedy for either gender, but as the logical endpoint of choices made across generations. Men walk away, not in anger, but in clarity, finding in solitude what eluded them in entanglement: durable peace, compounding growth, uncompromised sovereignty. The roads diverge permanently, each leading to destinations shaped by the principles that guide them. All roads, in their own way, lead to MWA, men walking away. Shout out to the 1 hour gang for reaching the end of this video. If you're enjoying these angry guy videos, show your support by buying me a Red Bull using the link in the description. Tell me in the comments what you thought about everything we discussed today. Do you agree with the direction society is heading? Do you see the same patterns in your own circles, or do you think there's still a way back from this divide? Drop your honest thoughts below and let's keep the conversation going. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.